My name is Evelyn Carter, and I was 29 years old when I learned that betrayal doesn't always arrive with shouting. Sometimes it arrives disguised as routine, a shared calendar reminder, a spreadsheet you've checked 100 times before, a number on a screen that suddenly doesn't make sense anymore. Last Tuesday, I logged into the high-yield savings account we'd labeled, very optimistically, wedding. It was a habit by then. I checked it every couple of weeks, not because I didn't trust my fiancé, Lucas Reed, but because I trusted myself to be thorough. That was always our unspoken balance. I handled logistics. He handled feelings. He joked that spreadsheets made his soul itch. I joked that emotions without structure gave me hives. We'd agreed early on that the account would be in my name only. Not for control, Lucas never cared about that, but for simplicity. One login, one point of responsibility. He transferred his portion every month into my checking account, and I moved the total into savings. Clean, transparent, mutually agreed upon, in writing, in texts, in a shared note we'd titled Our Future. Over 10 months, we saved just over $22,000. The venue deposit was due in 3 weeks. I remember the exact moment my breath stopped. The balance read $300. At first, I thought the page hadn't loaded correctly. I refreshed. Once. Twice. My pulse stayed strangely steady, like my body didn't want to alarm me until my brain caught up. Then I clicked into the transaction history. 3 transfers. Same day. 3 separate A-Shi withdrawals, totaling $18,500. Each spaced about an hour apart. Not sloppy, not accidental, intentional. The recipient's name sat there in neutral black font, indifferent to the damage it caused. Marissa Vaughn, Lucas's ex-girlfriend. The woman he used to describe as misunderstood and just unlucky. The woman he swore was completely out of his life. I stared at the name long enough for my coffee to go cold. To make those transfers, someone would have needed my login credentials. And with a quiet, sickening certainty, I realized how easy that had been. Lucas had watched me log in countless times on his laptop. I typed fast. Predictably. He knew my patterns. He knew which password I reused. He knew which account mattered most. And he chose it. What surprised me most wasn't the betrayal. It was the absence of rage. There was no urge to scream, no shaking hands, no dramatic spiral, just a vast, echoing stillness in my chest, like the moment after a car accident when everything goes quiet and your brain starts cataloging damage. I took screenshots. Every transfer, every timestamp, the full bank statement. Then I made my first call. The bank representative's voice was professional, sympathetic. She asked me security questions, confirmed there was no external breach, which meant the conclusion was unavoidable. Someone with direct access had stolen the money. The account was frozen immediately. A fraud investigation opened. My second call was to the non-emergency police line. I need to file a report for theft, I said, my voice calm enough that the officer asked me to repeat myself. At the station, I waited 2 hours under fluorescent lights that made everything feel unreal. I showed the officer our shared wedding budget, the text where Lucas and I discussed the account's sole purpose. He nodded slowly, his expression shifting from routine to concerned. This was not ambiguous, he said gently. When I left with a case number in my purse, I felt lighter, not relieved. Resolved. Lucas was home when I returned, humming in the kitchen, pasta boiling over like nothing in the world had shifted. He kissed my cheek. Hey, Ev, how was work? Busy, I said. For 2 days, I said nothing else. I watched him talk about flower arrangements, about guest lists, about how Marissa was finally doing better, a comment that landed differently now. Every word scraped, but I didn't flinch. I wasn't waiting to punish him. I was waiting for the truth to surface on its own. And it would. Lucas didn't notice the quiet. Or maybe he noticed it and decided it was safer not to name it. Like if he pretended everything was normal long enough, reality would get bored and move on. For 2 days, I played my role with a precision that felt almost out of body. I replied to his texts with punctuation. I nodded at the right moments. I smiled when he showed me a video of a minimalist centerpiece idea, like we still belonged to that future. Inside, though, something had gone ice cold and stayed there. Not hatred. Clarity. At night, when he fell asleep beside me, one arm tossed carelessly across my waist like ownership, I stared at the ceiling and listened to his breathing. The strangest part was how normal he looked in the dark. Same face I'd kissed, same voice I'd trusted, same hands that had once tightened the lid on my favorite jar because I couldn't get it open. And those same hands had taken $18,500 from the account we built together and given it to the one person I'd been told was ancient history. I didn't cry. Not because I was strong. Because my body didn't know where to put the grief yet. The bank called on the second morning. A calm woman with a calm voice, like calm could be offered in place of justice. "Ms. Carter," she said, "I wanted to update you. The account is currently under hold. We're proceeding with the fraud investigation, and, given the nature of the transactions, we may need additional documentation from you." "I have everything," I said, and I did. Screenshots, the wedding note, transfers from Lucas into my checking, the pattern of deposits, our texts, even the message he'd sent 3 months ago when I'd asked if we should increase the monthly amount. "Whatever you think is best, Ev. You're the money wizard." Money wizard. Right. The officer assigned to my report called later that day. His name was Detective Alvarez, and he had the exhausted patience of someone who'd seen every version of human entitlement. "I reviewed your documentation," he said. "It's thorough." I almost laughed. "Thank you," I replied, like he'd complimented my resume. He continued, "We'll be reaching out to the suspected parties. Given the amount involved, this qualifies as a felony theft case." A felony. That word should have made me feel something dramatic. Instead, it felt inevitable, like gravity. That night, Lucas came home with a bag from my favorite Thai place. "Peace offering," he said brightly, leaning in to kiss me. I let him. His lips were warm, familiar. The kiss lasted 2 seconds. He didn't taste like guilt. "Why?" I asked, taking the bag. He blinked. "Because you had a busy week?" Because he thought food could erase the unease. Because he'd always been the type to patch a problem without acknowledging the tear. We ate at the kitchen island, his knee occasionally bumping mine, like intimacies was a habit you could keep doing, even after you'd burned the house down. He talked about the venue, the menu, the photographer he'd been researching, and then, like it slipped out on accident, he said Marissa finally found a space. My chopsticks paused midair. "A space?" I echoed. He didn't notice the way my voice tightened on the word. "Yeah," he said casually, "like, for her studio. She's trying to get back on her feet. It's actually kinda inspiring." My mouth went dry. Studio. Lease. The words from the bank statement rearranged themselves in my mind with horrible neatness. 3 transfers. An hour apart. Planned to avoid flags. He hadn't stolen the money to survive. He'd stolen it to rescue her. My gaze stayed on his face, searching for cracks. A twitch, a flinch, anything. He just kept eating, scrolling his phone with his free hand, like this was a normal dinner conversation. "Lucas," I said softly. "Yeah," he replied, still looking at his screen. "How's Marissa paying for it?" He shrugged. "I don't know. She's figuring it out. His phone buzzed. He glanced down, and his entire body went still. Not subtle stillness, not thinking stillness. The kind of stillness that looks like someone just walked into a trap and heard the click. "What?" I asked. He swallowed. "Nothing." But his thumb hovered over the screen, trembling slightly. Then he stood up abruptly, chair legs scraping against the tile. "I'm going to take this outside," he said too fast. He stepped onto the balcony, pulling the door mostly shut behind him. Mostly. I sat there, still holding my chopsticks, and listened. His voice dropped low, urgent. I couldn't hear full sentences, just fragments. "He's frozen. I don't know. I swear. No, stop. Don't." Then a sharper, louder hiss. "Marissa, you can't do that." My hands were steady as I set the chopsticks down. Because there it was. The name, spoken like a warning. I walked to the balcony door slowly, like I had all the time in the world. Lucas had his back to me, one hand gripping the railing like he needed it to keep himself upright. "I told you I'd handle it," he was saying. Then, like the universe had perfect timing, his voice rose. "Because Evelyn will notice." I opened the balcony door. The cool air rushed in, and his head snapped toward me. His face was pale in a way I'd never seen before, pale like he'd been caught, not like he was sorry. His eyes darted, calculating. He ended the call immediately. I didn't ask who it was. I didn't need to. "What's frozen?" I asked. He laughed, one sharp, nervous sound that didn't match his face. "Nothing," he said too quickly. "I mean, something got declined. It's stupid. It's not a big deal." I tilted my head. "Something got declined?" He nodded, swallowing again. "Yeah, just bank stuff." Bank stuff. He said it like I wasn't the person who'd built our entire wedding budget in a color-coded spreadsheet. He said it like I wasn't the person who knew exactly what bank stuff meant. I stepped closer. "Lucas," I said, my voice calm enough to scare even me. "How much money is in our wedding account right now?" His eyes flicked away. "Just for a second." But that second was everything. "I don't know," he said. "Why are you—" Say the number, I interrupted. He stared at me, mouth slightly open, as if the concept of accountability was a language he'd never learned. Then his phone buzzed again, and again, and again. He didn't answer this time, but he didn't have to, because the consequences had started moving, and they didn't require my permission. The next morning, the explosion came early, and in the worst place possible. I was in the middle of a quarterly presentation with my department head, Alan, and 2 senior VPs. I had a clicker in my hand, a slide on the screen, and my voice was steady as I explained projections and anomalies like my life wasn't quietly burning in the background. My phone buzzed on silent in my pocket. Once, twice. I ignored it. Then my desk speaker crackled to life. My receptionist, Jenna, sounded flustered, like someone had walked in with a storm behind them. "Evelyn, I'm so sorry to interrupt," she said. "But your fiancé is here, and his parents. He's insisting it's an emergency." I didn't even have time to respond, because the conference room door burst open like it was made of paper instead of wood. Lucas stood there first. His face was blotchy red, his eyes wild, not with sadness, not with remorse, but with outrage. Behind him was his mother, Patricia, sharp and rigid like she'd been carved out of judgment. And his father, Frank, wringing his hands like he wanted to disappear into his own skin. Every head in the room turned. The air changed instantly. Lucas's voice hit the room like broken glass. "What did you do?" I set the clicker down slowly. The VPs stared. Alan's expression hardened in real time, shifting from confusion to irritation to something colder. Lucas stepped forward, pointing at me like I'd committed a crime against him. "The account is frozen," he shouted. "I tried to send Marissa the rest of the money for her studio lease, and it got declined." The room went silent. Not the polite silence of colleagues. The stunned silence of witnesses. I stood up. My heartbeat was steady, but my spine felt like steel. "We can discuss this later," I said, voice dangerously even. "I'm in a meeting." "No," Lucas screamed. "You did this. You froze our wedding money. How could you be so controlling?" Patricia's finger stabbed the air in my direction. "I always knew you were cold," she snapped. "She was helping someone in need. That's what good people do. You'd ruin your own wedding over a little bit of money?" A little bit of money. $18,500. I looked past them, directly at Alan. "I apologize," I said, controlled. "It seems my ex-fiancé has mistaken my workplace for his personal stage." The word ex landed like a dropped plate. Lucas's face jerked, fury cracking into panic. "What?" he sputtered. "Evelyn, what are you saying?" I turned back to him fully. The calm I'd worn for days wasn't cracking. It was settling. "Ex-fiancé," I repeated, "because you stole $18,500 from my savings account and sent it to your ex-girlfriend. That isn't helping someone in need. That's felony theft." Patricia gasped like I'd slapped her. Frank's mouth opened, then closed again. Lucas's face twisted. "You're insane," he hissed. "That money was ours." "It was a wedding fund," I said. "For our future, not Marissa's studio lease." Lucas surged forward, voice rising. "You froze it to punish me!" I shook my head once. "I didn't freeze anything," I said quietly. "I reported unauthorized transfers to the bank. They froze it as part of a fraud investigation." Lucas's eyes widened, and then I delivered the part that made his throat visibly tighten. "And I filed a police report 2 days ago," I added, "against you and Marissa." Frank finally found his voice, weak and pleading. "A police report?" he said. "Evelyn, isn't that a bit much? This is a family matter." I looked at him, not with hatred, not with cruelty, with the same clarity I'd had since the moment I saw the balance drop. "When it involves my life savings and a felony," I said flatly, "it stops being a family matter and becomes a legal one." Alan's hand moved toward the phone on the table. Lucas noticed. His breathing turned ragged. Patricia snapped, "You can't do this to him. He made a mistake." Lucas's voice went sharp and desperate. "You're the thief," he spat. "You stole our future." I held his gaze. And in front of my boss, in front of executives, in front of people who would remember this moment whether I wanted them to or not, I said, "You stole it first." Security arrived faster than I expected. Jenna must have called the moment the door burst open. 2 guards stepped in, calm and professional, and Alan spoke in a tone that made it clear there would be no argument. "Escort them out," he said. Lucas tried to twist back toward me as he was guided out, his voice turning frantic. "You'll regret this. You can't press charges on your fiancé." I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I watched him vanish down the hallway, still shouting, still trying to turn his consequences into my cruelty. When the door shut and the room finally exhaled, I turned back to Alan. "I'm sorry," I said, voice steady. Alan studied me for a long moment. Then he nodded, strangely respectful. Take the rest of the day, he said. Go get your head straight. I picked up my phone, walked out of the building, and didn't look back. Because the screaming part was over. Now came the fallout. The silence after the explosion was almost worse than the shouting. My apartment felt contaminated. Every surface seemed to hold an echo of Lucas, his mug in the sink, his jacket slung over the chair like he'd be back any second, his shoes still lined up by the door in that neat, performative way that now felt like mockery. I didn't cry when I got home. I didn't collapse. I packed. Not dramatically, not with shaking hands, just efficiently. I filled one suitcase with essentials, unplugged my laptop, and left the engagement ring on the kitchen counter beneath a folded note that said only, "Do not contact me again. All communication goes through my attorney." I hadn't hired one yet, but I would. Within hours, the messages started. Lucas first. "Evelyn, please, this is out of control. You embarrassed me. We need to talk like adults." Then Patricia. "I never thought you'd be this vindictive. Families don't destroy each other like this." Then numbers I didn't recognize. Friends of friends, distant relatives, people who had never once asked me how I was doing, now suddenly invested in my mental state. I turned my phone off. The next morning, I hired Marlene Weiss, a criminal and civil attorney whose reviews all used the same word, unpleasant, which I quickly learned meant effective. She didn't flinch when I laid out the facts, didn't soften her language, didn't ask me how I felt. She asked what I wanted. "I want my money back," I said, "and I want the truth on record." She nodded once. "Good, because that's exactly what the system is built for, when people actually use it." The detective contacted Lucas and Marissa that same week. That was when their tactics shifted. First came the story, the rewritten version of reality. Lucas told people I was financially abusive, that the account was basically joint, that he'd only helped Marissa because she was in crisis and I'd lost perspective. Patricia amplified it. She called relatives, old family friends, anyone who'd listen. She controlled everything, Patricia said. The money, the plans. Lucas was suffocating. It might have worked if the evidence didn't exist. Bank records don't care about narratives. Neither do screenshots. When the smear campaign fizzled, Lucas tried something else. At 11:47 p.m. on a Thursday night, a text came through. "Evelyn, we need to talk. I haven't been feeling well. I missed my period. I think I might be pregnant." For 5 seconds, my blood went ice cold. For 5 seconds, I pictured a future where he was permanently tethered to me by biology and guilt. Then Marlene's voice cut through my panic, echoing advice she'd given me days earlier. "If he suddenly mentions pregnancy, do not react emotionally." So I didn't, I replied once. "If that turns out to be true, all communication will still go through my attorney. Any paternity questions will be addressed legally after birth. This does not affect the criminal case." Then I blocked him. The pregnancy was never mentioned again. 24 hours later, Marlene received a certified letter from Lucas's lawyer, an offer. If I agreed to withdraw my complaint with the district attorney, Lucas would generously agree to repay the stolen money, at a rate of $100 a month. No interest. No timeline. 15 years. The letter called it a good faith effort to resolve an unfortunate family dispute. Marlene laughed when she read it, a short, humorless sound. "They think you're bluffing," she said, "and they think you're afraid to look like the bad guy." She drafted our response in 3 sentences. "We reject your offer. We intend to cooperate fully with the district attorney's prosecution. Following the conclusion of the criminal case, we will pursue a civil suit for full restitution and legal fees." And just like that, the door closed. Weeks later, the criminal case accelerated. The evidence was overwhelming. The transfers, Lucas's confession at my office, Marissa's social media, where she proudly documented the launch of her new creative studio, complete with photos of expensive equipment and captions about finally being supported. Supported. With my wedding money. Their lawyer advised a plea deal. Lucas pleaded guilty to felony theft. No jail, but 5 years of probation and full restitution. Marissa wasn't as lucky. A prior fraud conviction surfaced. She was sentenced to 6 months in county jail for receiving stolen property. Her studio vanished overnight. The day the pleas were entered, I felt nothing. No victory. No relief. Just a quiet internal click, like a lock finally closing. That weekend, while cleaning out the last box of shared things, I found the wedding gift I'd bought Lucas months earlier. A minimalist watch engraved on the back, Our Forever, 05/18/25. I stared at it for a long time. Then I sold it. Not for the money, for the weight leaving my hands. The criminal case closed quietly. No dramatic courtroom monologue. No last-minute confession. Just paperwork, signatures, and a judge reading outcomes in a tone that suggested this was one of many disappointments scheduled before lunch. Marlene warned me not to expect emotional payoff. Justice is procedural, she said, not cinematic. She was right. Lucas avoided jail, but probation reshaped his life in ways he hadn't anticipated. Mandatory employment, mandatory payments, mandatory humility, something he'd never practiced. Marissa served her time and came out smaller somehow. Not physically, socially. The kind of smaller that follows people who've been exposed publicly for who they are. The civil suit followed exactly as predicted, open and shut. The criminal conviction sealed it. The judge awarded me the full $18,500 plus attorney's fees, jointly and severally against Lucas and Marissa. On paper, it was a win. In reality, collecting that money became a long, grinding lesson in how consequences stretch out far beyond verdicts. Marissa disappeared. No forwarding address, no stable employment, no trace that was worth the legal cost of chasing. Lucas stayed. With a felony record, his options shrank fast. He landed a job waiting tables at a mid-range restaurant, one of those places that pretends to be upscale but survives on birthdays and corporate lunches. His wages were garnished. After taxes and probation fees, about $70 a month reached my account. $70. A monthly reminder. At first, I checked the deposits obsessively. Not because I needed the money, I'd rebuilt my savings by then, but because each payment felt like proof that I hadn't imagined any of it, that the betrayal had been real, that the system had, at least partially, worked. Eventually, I stopped watching so closely. Time softened the edges. I moved into a new apartment across town. Brighter, quieter, no shared memories baked into the walls. I donated most of the old furniture, changed routines, changed grocery stores. Life rearranged itself. I wasn't dating. Not out of bitterness, out of honesty. Trust felt like a muscle that had torn completely. I wasn't interested in pretending it was fine just because time had passed. Then, about 6 months into Lucas's probation, something shifted. The payments increased. Not dramatically, but noticeably. $90, then $110. Marlene noticed too. Interesting, she said, tapping the statement. Those don't look like wage garnishments. A mutual acquaintance filled in the rest. Lucas had missed a payment. Lost his job. Probation didn't care why. Missed payments meant violations. Violations meant jail. And this was when his parents stepped in. Patricia and Frank, so vocal when they thought I was the villain, suddenly discovered the cost of unconditional defense. They paid his back restitution. They paid his rent. They paid his legal fees from the civil suit. First, they drained their retirement savings. When that wasn't enough, they took out a second mortgage on the house they'd lived in for 30 years. The house Patricia used to brag about like it was a personal achievement unlocked. They weren't legally obligated to pay me a cent, but they did. Because protecting Lucas from consequences mattered more to them than protecting themselves from ruin. The final contact came almost a year and a half after the day I checked that account balance. An unknown number. I almost didn't answer. But something told me to. Evelyn, a tired voice said. It was Frank. He sounded smaller than I remembered. We had to sell the house, he said quietly. We're moving into a rental. I said nothing. You got what you wanted, he continued, bitterness cracking through exhaustion. You ruined us. The old version of me, the woman who still believed being reasonable meant absorbing other people's guilt, might have apologized. But that woman didn't exist anymore. I didn't do anything to you, Frank, I said calmly. I saved for a wedding. Lucas stole that money. When he was caught, you and Patricia chose to protect him from responsibility instead of helping him face it. Silence stretched. Every bill you paid, I continued, every asset you sold, that was your choice, not mine. He didn't argue. He just exhaled. Then the line went dead. The payments still arrive every month. They come from a much smaller address now. I don't need the money anymore. It goes into a separate account. I've thought about donating it someday, to a legal aid fund or a victim's assistance program. Something that turns harm into something useful. Life is quiet now. Not empty. Quiet. I travel more. I sleep better. I trust my instincts again. The scar is still there, but it doesn't hurt when I touch it. I learned that silence isn't weakness. Sometimes it's precision. And when faced with betrayal, I didn't scream. I documented. I acted. I walked away with my future intact. They're still living inside the consequences of their own choices. And that, more than any sentence or judgment, is the truest form of justice I've ever known. There isn't much left to tell. That surprised me at first. How a story that once consumed every thought could taper off into something almost ordinary. The restitution payments still arrive. Not on the exact same day each month, but close enough to be predictable. A few $100s now, sometimes a little more. I don't check the sender details anymore. I already know where they come from, and I don't need the reminder. Lucas never tried to contact me again. Not an apology, not a justification, not even anger. That silence used to bother me. I wondered if it meant he still thought he was right, or worse, that he didn't think about me at all. Eventually, I understood something quieter and more accurate. Silence doesn't always mean indifference. Sometimes it means there's nothing left to say that won't make things worse. I heard through distant channels that Lucas moved to another city after his probation restrictions eased. Smaller place, smaller life. Nothing dramatic, just the slow recalibration of someone who'd finally learned that other people's resources were no longer available to him. Marissa never resurfaced in any meaningful way. Her social media accounts vanished. The creative world she'd tried to buy her way into never opened its doors again. People remember fraud longer than they remember talent. As for Patricia and Frank, I don't wonder about them anymore. I used to replay that phone call, analyzing my words, checking for cruelty, making sure I hadn't crossed some invisible line between self-defense and punishment. But with time came clarity. They weren't ruined by me. They were ruined by the belief that love meant insulation from consequences. That belief cost people everything. A year and a half after the day my life split in two, I stood in my new apartment, sunlight pouring in through windows that didn't hold old arguments in their corners, and realized something else. I wasn't afraid anymore. Not of banks, not of relationships, not of trusting my own judgment. The world hadn't become safer. I had become clearer. I keep my finances simple now, my boundaries clearer still. When someone tells me a story that doesn't match the evidence, I listen to the evidence. I don't rush to fix people, I don't confuse love with rescue, and I don't mistake silence for weakness. If I ever love again, and I think I will, it will be with someone who understands that trust isn't proved by access, but by restraint. That futures aren't taken. They're built together, slowly, openly, with nothing hidden in the fine print. This story didn't end with forgiveness. It ended with accountability and peace.